We went into this situation with the US targeting three of Iran's nuclear sites over this past weekend. And of
Yeah.
course, this was something that people were wondering if it would or wouldn't happen. But the full context here is that the US and Iran were engaged in negotiations over a new nuclear deal. And the president had pulled out of the previous nuclear deal that was signed during the Obama administration, which
Yeah.
actually helped to keep Iran's arms development at bay. Could you kind of offer some insight into the logic of pulling out of the agreement and then now wanting to renegotiate the agreement?
Well, um, logic is an interesting word to use there. A couple of things. One, this is pretty standard for President Trump. So if you can look at like the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, right? He wanted to renegotiate that agreement. He wants to renegotiate most of our tariff and trade agreements, right? He likes to renegotiate things so that he can say that they're better, whether or not that's true or not, right? It's it's how he does foreign policy. He likes to renegotiate. Now, to get to the big picture about Iran and the original agreement, it was very frustrating for European countries and Middle Eastern countries when the Trump administration pulled out of that agreement the first time. And the reason that it was frustrating is that Europe, our allies, our intelligence agencies, uh, all said that Iran was, in fact, abiding by the agreement. So why pull out of an agreement that they're abiding by? And the short answer is the Trump administration thought at some point Iran was going to cheat on the agreement. And the reason we thought that was that Iran, the United States, and Israel are in a hostile relationship. And the truth is, Iran probably was going to pull out of that agreement, or not pull out, but cheat on that agreement at some point because they can't trust the United States or Israel, just like the United States can't trust Iran. In essence, what you see here is a classic prisoner's dilemma, where all sides would be much better off cooperating, but the penalty for you cooperating and the other side defecting or cheating is exceptionally high. And so the Trump administration moved first to say, look, sometime in the future, I think they're going to cheat. The end. Now, why that was probably a bad move is that your hope is that you can bring Iran back into the international community a little more, almost like China, right? And the Obama administration, excuse me, tried this with Cuba also. So instead of like exiling them, let's bring them in, let's bring them into the global economy, let's tie them into us, and then make them dependent on us. And then they have no real reason to attack us.
How would you say negotiations can progress given that the US essentially blew up the talks? I know that Vice President JD Vance said he felt like the Iranians were stonewalling and that they were stalling in order to advance their program. But how does it help to respond with this attack, which could make it possibly more unlikely for negotiations to continue productively?
Yeah, well, Iran was probably trying to speed up its nuclear program even more because Hezbollah has been weakened in Lebanon, Hamas has been weakened in Gaza, and their allies in Yemen have also been weakened. So Iran has been weakened sort of across the board. So the best thing for Iran to do, right, would be to either completely give it up, which they can't do because they can't trust Israel or the United States, or to rapidly make a bomb that can hit Israel or one of our bases so that it can act as a deterrence. So I think he's probably right in that sense. Vice President is right in the sense that I think they're probably trying to rush a bomb. Now, the negotiating part right here is complicated because I think what Israel and the United States want to do is weaken Iran so much that they have to negotiate from a position of weakness. We don't know yet where they stand on that, right? We for sure they're weakened, but we don't know how much more weakened they are. And even if they're exceptionally weakened, they're not going to try to just, roll over. And so this is going to be a sort of complicated situation, I think, long term.
And obviously, there is this concern that if Iran is able to obtain a nuclear weapon, that we will see an arms race because Iran's neighbors may feel they need a nuclear weapon. So, is there going to be that real concern that that's what happens as a result of Iran having one, not just that there's a potential threat to, of course, the United States and its forces there, but to the entire region?
Well, it's funny um, that you focus on Iran perhaps causing an arms race for nuclear weapons, right? We can go back in time a little bit and look at the one state in the Middle East that does have a nuclear weapon, which is Israel, and how that, right, scared Saudi Arabia and Iran and Syria and other states, right, to start both a conventional arms race and then a movement towards a nuclear weapon, right? So that's really kind of where it started. I'm not blaming Israel on that. Again, I fully understand why Israel would want a nuclear weapon. Um, what's interesting about that, right, is that Israel and Saudi Arabia before October the 7th, 6th, 7th, a few years ago, um, were normalizing relations, right? So Saudi Arabia is one of those triangles who would really want a nuclear weapon. I think what you're going to see largely is probably a more a conventional arms race.
And it's obviously a question here, of course, because going forward, you're going to have these conversations with all parties. But I'm just curious, how much do you think Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu influenced the president's decision to attack Iran's nuclear program?
I I'm obviously not in the room, but it seems like Prime Minister Netanyahu has significant leeway to act in any way that he chooses, right, vis-a-vis the United States, under both the Trump administration and the prior Biden administration.
The White House is saying that they want to have this be something that is quick, that they wanted this to be a very targeted operation, and it was a targeted operation, but there are those concerns, though, moving forward, that this situation could escalate into another broader regional war. Is there that real threat that this can expand into a greater conflict than maybe the White House intended?
Yeah, a week ago I would have said no, and now I'm quite worried about that actually. And I'm worried about it for a few reasons. One, the United States attacked, but prior to that 2 week window, right, that the Trump administration originally said that it would give. Two, you're starting to see a lot of talking heads on X and Blue Sky and other places talking about regime change, including the president of the United States. And so if you start hearing that, it starts making me concerned about mission creep and long-term U.S. interest in actions in the region. There are a lot of memes going around right now, right, about the Iraq War and Iran, right? Like you change one letter, and more or less you've got the same thing, right? Like there are weapons of mass destruction. Okay, there are nuclear weapons. Okay, there's a regime that wants to be overthrown. Okay, there's a regime that wants to be overthrown. I mean, there's a lot of wow, history feels really similar right now. I'm not going to say it's repeating, but it feels really similar to the Iraq invasion. And so, in that sense, I think some of us are concerned.
Would you say that the White House, though, has been forthcoming about this situation? Because I think that there is also that distrust to some extent with the American public, which, of course, has seen this play out before. And would you say that the White House has done a concerted effort to try to fight that, or have they just kind of been marching to the beat of their own drum?
Um, my honest assessment of that is the White House is not forthcoming in most anything.
We've learned about this attack in Qatar on that Air Force base there. Obviously, Iran is saying that this is something that they warned about, that they would do this. But is the White House kind of cornered now? Does the White House have to respond to this situation in a more aggressive manner, or can they go without responding to it?
I think they'll respond, and I'll answer that question, but I want to go back to the your prior question just a second ago. One of the reasons they're not forthcoming, right, is that they didn't talk to the Senate Intelligence Democrats, for example. There are real questions surrounding whether or not they talked to the Secretary of Defense and other things like that, right? So there are real, this attack occurred in like non-traditional ways for the United States. And so that means that it's not like it wasn't very forthcoming, right, in what they did. Um, the US has to respond, as I mentioned, right? We have to show that we're powerful. We have to sort of get the last word in here. So you'll certainly see, I think, missiles fired by the United States from our ships nearby, or some sorties flown over Iran. Yeah.